I'll be the last one left when the lights go out. I'm down to
Hey, brothers and sisters, welcome to the Port. Today we're going to do part 2 of the 9 hindrances. So we're just going to get right into it. We're going to pick up in hindrance number 4. And hindrance number 4 is God does his part and you do your part. If you've been in the church long enough, I'm sure that you have heard that phrase being uttered. Or maybe you've maybe not heard it in the church, but maybe you've heard it in, people think that that's what Christianity is about. God does his part and you do your part. Well, folks, let me tell you that isn't the gospel. The gospel is this: God does his part, and your part is to realize that your only part is to believe and to trust in him. That's the gospel, okay? Just like salvation is an act of God, so is everything you do afterwards an act of God through you. Your part is to believe, to trust, to surrender to that which God is doing through you. Okay? That's your part. Salvation, just like I said, salvation, we know that God did it, right? But then everything after that is also God. I was never taught that in church. I was always, the moment I got saved, I went right into performance. Got saved, God did that, but now, it's all about my efforts. That is not the gospel. The Bible talks about the fruit of the Spirit, right? The fruit of the Spirit. It's not referred to as the fruit of your effort or the fruit of your strength. It says the fruit of the Spirit. And folks, the fruit of the Spirit you can't produce. It's a fruit of the Spirit. And what the Bible is referring to when it talks about fruit of the Spirit, it's talking about behaviors like love, patience, kindness, gentleness, even self-control. Okay, is referred to as a fruit of the Spirit, right? You cannot produce that. All you can do is bear that. But God produces that. And faith is what releases that work that God does in you and through you. All you could do is believe and trust and depend, and God does that through you. Here's a wonderful phrase. When we rest, God works. When we work, God rests. Do you remember if you've been saved, or if you've gone to church, and you gave your life to the Lord, and it seemed like the moment you gave your life to the Lord, life just flipped upside down? Well, I've realized that is God's way of teaching us how to trust and depend on him. Because the Christian walk is all about that. It's all about, it's not just God saving you, it's God continuously, it's God saving you, but God continuously living his life through you and for you. And your job is to surrender to. That's the Christian life, a life of radical dependence. Radical dependence. Because I was kind of getting grumpy when I was thinking about, I really never heard this kind of teaching of surrendering to his life. I didn't learn any of this stuff till much later in my Christian walk. And when I was thinking about it, I was getting grumpy about, oh my Lord, why didn't I learn this stuff earlier? It would have been great. But I realized that God has always been teaching me this life of complete dependency and to trust him. And when you look at it, that's the people that have been, the people that I've seen, who I've admired, have been people of great faith who have depended on God for great things. And we always, let me just share a little story. I remember one time I was at a church conference, and I remember there was this one guy. He was talking about how he built his church, right? And he did these radical things, right? And everything he was doing, one of the things that really stood out to me is that he was talking about how he just believed God, and he was doing things because he was doing things he felt God was telling him to do. And whatever God was telling him to do, he was doing, and then it caused an explosion in his church. But his church became really big. And I remember a lot of the questions that the pastors were asking, and I was there too, because I think I was an associate at the time, and they were asking about the methods. And I can remember what was the thing that was going on in my head all the time, it goes, it's not a method. He just prayed and he heard God and he just did what God, it's an act of faith. And that's what the Christian life is, a total radical dependence on God. So when people say God does his part and you do your part is to believe and to trust. God does all of it. It's not God does his part and you do. God does it all. Your job is to rest, surrender, and to trust in him. Let's continue. So that's the first hindrance. That's the fourth hindrance. The fifth hindrance is we're just sinners saved by grace. Again, I think if you've been in the church, you've heard this being said, either being said or being told to people. I mean, I've heard, I've said this to people, to non-believers. The only difference between you and I are that, I'm forgiven. And let me tell you, as well-intended as that can be, that is completely false, Okay? Believers are not sinners saved by grace. We're just not. The truth is that on the cross, Jesus didn't just do something for me. He did something to me that becomes actualized the moment I believe. I am not just a sinner. Or let me just say, I am no longer a sinner, because that is not my identity. Yeah, and Paul goes to great length to convince the church that the moment Christ died on the cross, that old life, that old sinful life, is no longer your identity. Paul uses terms like, or phrases like, you're the righteousness of Christ. Or he'll say, you're partakers of the divine nature. He'll use terms like, there's no longer no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. You are not condemned. I like it says in Ephesians, you have been blessed with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. Paul doesn't just say that we are children of God. He addresses us as sons and daughters of the King, or that we are kings and priests. And that's important for you to understand. Believers are not merely sinners saved by grace. We are saints who are maybe sustained by grace, but we're not sinners. Paul never addressed the church as the sinners that are in Corinth or the sinners that are in Ephesians. He said to the saints or to the chosen that are in Ephesians, or the chosen that are in Corinth, or the anointed ones that are there, or the faithful ones that are there. That's how Paul addressed. So that fifth hindrance that you're a sinner saved by grace, you're not. You're a saint. Don't buy into that mentality. And hindrance number 6. Now I'm going to take this one a little slow. Obedience is the essence of the Christian life. Obedience is the essence of the Christian life. Now, it is true that in the Old Testament, under the Mosaic law, obedience was the essence of a godly life and the key to a relationship and fellowship with God. Obedience. The performance of the people is the essence of their relationship with God under the Old Covenant. But when Jesus said on the cross, it is finished, and he died on the cross and rose again, the old covenant was done away with. Okay? And the new one was established. And that new covenant is the covenant of grace. Okay? We are no longer under the old covenant, but we're under grace. And that's important for you to understand that. So the obedience of performance that was once the essence of a relationship with God under the old covenant was done away with, because Jesus fulfilled the law. Remember, Jesus said in Matthew, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And once he fulfilled it, died on the cross and resurrected, the fulfilling of the law is null and void. There's no reason to use the law and try to fulfill the law. People sometimes take the law and they try to establish themselves in the law. And Paul made it really clear that the law is no longer there for you to fulfill. The law is there to expose how you can't fulfill it. So we don't have to try in the new covenant. It's not obedience of performance to try to fulfill the law. Jesus did it because he's the only one that could do it. We're no longer under the idea of obedience of performance, but we're under the obedience in the new covenant. We're under the obedience of faith, not the obedience of performance. We're under the obedience of faith. Obedience of faith. Under the new covenant, our acceptance is not based on what we do. It's always based on our faith, our dependence, our accepting on what was done for us and what is continuously being done through us. That's what Paul talked about when he talked about obedience of faith. I believe and I accept that he has made me righteous, holy, and acceptable. And I believe and I walk by faith in the life that lives in me, and I surrender to that life, and I cry out to God to move through me. That's obedience of faith. It's not obedience of performance. That right kind of thinking leads to right kind of living. That kind of right thinking leads to right actions, not the other way around. Let me try to make it a little bit practical. There's one of my favorite theologians. His name is Watchman Nee. He was a Chinese theologian. And he's known for a lot of great teachings. One of his most popular teachings is the normal Christian life. But there's another teaching of his entitled Sit, Walk, Stand. And it's based out of the book of Ephesians. Just a phenomenal teaching. It's a small book that you can find anywhere. I recommend everyone read it. But the premise of that book, again, it's out of the book of Ephesians. He summarizes the book of Ephesians with those three words: sit, walk, stand. And again, the premise of that book is basically that a believer needs to first learn how to sit in his identity. Learn his identity. Learn what was given to him on the cross. What was accomplished? How does that, the believer can feel secure in what Christ has done, and what the believer now has something residing in him, that he first has to understand that he has to learn how to sit before he can learn to walk. He has to learn how to sit and understand that identity. Then when you understand who you are and what's living inside you, then you start walking with the understanding that it's not your strength, but his strength manifesting through you. That's what Paul is talking about when it comes to obedience of faith. Salvation is done by faith. So is the life then after. It's always dependent and living by his life. When I wanted to find some phrases to summarize what that is. And I remember when I was reviewing this, I wanted some quick phrases. So this is stuff that came to mind. I believe the Lord gave it to me. Well, I'll give glory to him. And I posted it on Facebook, so I thought it was great. And it's: Christianity is not behavior modification. Christianity is Christ's manifestation. Christianity is not about doing righteousness. It's about Christ doing righteousness through you. That is the essence of the Christian life. Walking by faith and not obedience. It's a life of faith, not a life of obedience. Obedience is faith. Because even when I say that, it's not a life of obedience. It's obedience of faith, not obedience of performance. The Christian life, in essence, is a life of faith, a life of obedience of faith. That's what it's about. So those are the three of this part, and I hope you got something from that. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and looking forward to talking with you again. God bless you guys.
We all fall down sometimes, but that's just life.